Hello, everyone, and welcome to Adobe Live. My name is James Bonanno, and I will be your host over the next 5 days on a daily creative challenge in Premiere Pro. I am super excited to be back doing this once again and bringing you all a little bit of a taste of my favorite shortcuts, tips, some color grading, just some magic inside of Premiere Pro. And without further ado, let's hop right into it. If you are joining for the very first time and you are over here on the Adobe Creative Cloud YouTube, please make sure to check those source files down here in the description. Or if you're over on Behance and you want to engage in the chat a little bit more, I will try to answer some questions as we get on with the first lesson of the week, and that is color grading in Adobe Premiere Pro. So let's hop right into it. All right, everyone. So on this Monday morning, wherever you are at, humid, hot, rainy, beautiful Monday morning, we are talking about color grading using the Lumetri color tab and sort of comparison color grading in Premiere Pro. This is a really powerful tool, and I think every video editor should be aware of some of these scopes. So before we actually get into the physical grading process and the color correction process, if you will, I just want to point out a couple of the scopes that I have up here on my left-hand panel to address what we have going on here. So if you just open up Premiere Pro in the default window for the very first time, your Lumetri Scopes right here is going to look slightly different. And if you don't see this, what I'd like everyone to do following along is go to settings here. You're going to click on this little wrench and you have all these options down here that I currently have checked. So we have waveform, parade, RGB, red, green, blue, RGB, and your vector scope, YUV, which is essentially just the brightness of your image. So I can click any of these on and off. I can click, well, let's see, maybe it froze on us here, but let's see here. Let's go back. I already have these clicked, so I'm going to pretend that they're already up there. But basically what you have is on the left-hand corner, you have a scope that is your brightness, okay? To the right of this is where your saturation and your color, your reds and greens, your purple, magenta colors, your blues, you can see all of those right here. So if we click into a clip here, let's see, you can actually see as I scroll through this, let's mute our audio track here, you'll see these move. And basically, this is controlling your highlights, your shadows, your midtones. Down here, you have your reds, your greens, your blues, so that you can make sure that you have a really nice balanced color in the end. If I scroll to another clip, you can actually see those scopes dynamically change for the clip that you're editing. So really basic stuff in terms of color grading, color correction, but I use this kind of as my Bible. It's gospel as I'm editing. The more you color grade and the more you color correct, the better you'll get. And you may not need to use these, but it's always good to just keep it up as a reference so that you're not clipping your highlights and you're not crushing your shadows or your blacks too much. Okay, so what we have here, I basically have, if you open up those source files, I've aggregated a couple high-res cinema files from a recent trip out to Bend, Oregon. And a lot of these clips were filmed in different times of the day. One was filmed inside, some were outside, some were light sky, some were a little bit overcast. So my goal in the 20 minutes that I have today is to go over how I would color correct these images to make sure that they all flow together if I was going to be exporting this as a finished piece. Because you do want everything to have a theme and look consistent, even if they're shot over the course of a few months, a few days, whatever it is. So let's just hop in and start grading these as I would. I'm gonna actually leave this clip at the end. It's a clip of us in the van cooking. So let's just start here. The first thing I like to do, if you're in just your general editing window, let's say you opened up Premiere and this is what you have, I want you to go into your workspaces and change to color, okay? This is going to make it so much easier to actually see what you're working on and keep all of those scopes handy right here and all of your editing right here to the right. So we have our Lumetri color tab here. If I just click on this click on this clip, ooh, that's a tongue twister. We are going to start to adjust some of these individual parameters. So I can see that, the image is very flat. Let me just start by saying I always shoot in a log profile. So if you're using a cinema camera, if you're using a mirrorless camera, the best way to get the most out of your color is to shoot in some sort of log format, which is essentially a flat color profile that gives you a wider dynamic range to edit those colors and make something that's a little more custom and look really rich and full. So I start there. So let's see. I think what I want to do is I want to actually cool this image down a little bit because it's winter. Well, it's spring in Bend, Oregon, but apparently it's winter. There was about like 4 feet of snow that we were very surprised of. And I'm going to turn this down. So you can see as I change the temperature here and I bring this all the way down, notice those scopes moving. Notice that that blue scope, because I'm cooling this image down, is now the more apparent property, right? And we don't necessarily want it to be overpowering to the point where it's only blue that we see. So I'm just going to take this down a little bit, just to subtle is going to be the term here that we're going to use. And what I want to do is I like to kind of crush my blacks a little bit and expand that dynamic range as best I can. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to take where it is 20 here in this YUV scope, I'm going to try to bring that to 10. And how I'll do that is I'll take my blacks, and as you see, I'm bringing my blacks, and now I'm getting this really, really nice, deep, rich black in the woods there, but I'm not clipping anything. And if I was going to clip them, if I bring this all the way down, you'll actually see that line where it says 0. This now means that I'm losing detail in those parts of the blacks and the shadows, which I do not want. So I want to push it as best I can to really get that nice rich contrast, but I don't want to lose that detail. Okay, so I'm going to pull the blacks down nicely. This is just something that I like to do first. And even just that, you know, before and after, you have a little effects window up here. Just that helps to give those blacks a little bit more richness. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to do the same thing, but the inverse to the highlights and the whites. So I don't want to blow anything out here in the snow. So what I might do is I might take the highlights up a little bit. You'll notice that we're getting some nice contrast happening here. If I pull this all the way up, I actually still am not clipping anything, which is nice because of the way that that image was exposed. So again, color grading is that final step. To get the most out of your color, you really want to make sure that you're exposing your video properly. And there's a lot of settings inside, you know, each camera that allow you to do that. And with practice, you'll get better and better. So I'm gonna bring these highlights up. One thing I do want to do is I want to add back some saturation and some color here because again, log profile desaturates the image quite a bit. So I'm going to come in here and go 130 to bring back some of that color. And right now, the only color we're getting is in the sky here, the blue and the green. So let's just go, let's say 145 and really crank it up a little bit. That's doing something pretty nice. I'm going to go into Creative tab actually, and I'm going to adjust this vibrance a little bit. And you can see kind of what's changing. And I really like that green is starting to become a little more saturated. So come in here, let's go 25% before and after, and that's starting to look really, really nice. Here is your curves panel. So you do have the option to further adjust that contrast, those midtones, those shadows. So if I come in here and I create your standard S curve, I'm putting some points here. This is my RGB curve. So if I pull this down, I'm now getting a much more contrasty shadow, and the blacks are coming down more, which I like, but I don't want to go overboard. And you can actually individually see how those curves affect the image and then how the whole color is coming together. So that's starting to look really, really nice. Let's maybe just bring up the midtones a hair. Okay, so right in here, we're bringing this up. And again, I'm looking at my scopes the entire time to make sure that nothing is clipping and I'm not losing detail. I can't stress that enough. That's just me. There's tons of different ways to do this, but I prefer to have those scopes up whenever I can. Okay, so we don't have a ton of time here today to go through each one really, really specifically, but this is looking pretty good. Now, what I would do first is I'm going to go through and I'm going to quickly just do that same process for each of these clips. So I go back into my correction here. So we have kind of similar clips. And if I want, this is a really powerful tool here. There's a little widget called comparison view that you would see right here in your program window. Again, if you do not see this, go to the plus button editor, click this, and you'll see it right here in the button editor. Whatever you don't see, you just bring it and drag it here so that it's more accessible. I'm going to click this on. And now what you see is I can scroll through the rest of the clips and I can actually compare what I've done to what I'm about to do. And the reason that's so important is because we, again, like I said, we want to make sure that there's consistency among the clips that we're color grading because they're all shot in sort of different environments. So what I'd like to do is I want to keep this up as I color grade. We're going to zoom in a little bit. Actually, let's turn this off. We can adjust different splits. We can look at them this way, but I'm going to turn it off for now. And then I'm going to turn that comparison view back on once it's graded, and we'll make those final tweaks when we're ready. So again, scopes right here. Give me 1 second here. Let's see, we got our scopes going. All right. And this looks super flat. So the first thing I'm going to do, let's add some saturation back into this 130, maybe 140. And again, this bottom scope here is super important when it comes to the saturation, because I'll just show you, if I really cranked the saturation here, which doesn't do all that much, you can see that this little white blob is a representation of where that saturation is being affected the most. So this right now is looking pretty balanced. If I dragged the yellows or the reds to warm this image up, you'll notice that that looks very unbalanced. Obviously doesn't look good to the eye, and we're seeing that represented here in the scope. So I'm gonna just leave the saturation at 150 because it's not too overpowering right now. And then let's make these adjustments to our lighting here. So same thing, let's take the blacks and let's bring them down, not too far. How about like somewhere right in here? All right, and for those that are joining the chat, welcome, welcome. I am sucked into color grading mode, but Kevin, Valdair, Cody Bear, welcome everyone. It's great to see some familiar names in the chat, and any questions you have in the next 15 minutes that we have here, please feel free to let me know and I'll try to get them addressed. So this is our exposure adjustment. I touch this if I have to. I really try to just stay to the highlights and the whites because I think it looks a little better. Of course, there's times when you have to adjust that exposure. You just have no option. So you can see already just with those little tweaks, we've taken those scopes, we've started to bring those highlights up. I'm actually going to touch the whites a little bit here. Let's bring the whites up, and the shadows are looking pretty good. We're going to go into our curves, same kind of thing here, just a standard little S curve. Let's take those shadows and those dark tones down. It's really looking nice and contrasty. And again, once we do this, we might want to go back into that saturation and tone that down just a bit. All right, and let's take I think the midtones are looking pretty good. And I kind of wanted to take the highlights up here down a little. And let's see. Again, a lot of this then just sort of turns into preference. You know, it's once you get a style down, this is really where that style comes into play, that creative style that you might have. Now, let's say I wanted to take the green tones or these yellow tones right here, and I wanted to change just the yellow tone to make it a little bit more on the orange side or the red side. What I could do here is underneath your curves, I have a hue saturation, a hue slider, and hue luma slider. And basically this eyedropper tool allows me to take a sample of, let's say, this yellow, and it creates these 3 points here on my hue slider. And so if I drag this up or down, this is actually my saturation. So I meant to do hue, but you can kind of see what's happening here is it's actually taking the saturation out of anything that it deems as yellow. In this case, her skin tone is one of those things. So we don't want to do that. But I do want to take it just to the orange a little bit. So that's too much, but let's just bring it up just a hair. Again, subtle. I didn't really like the green tint in that yellow. So now it's a little bit warmer. And so if I bring this comparison view up again, now I can look at these two and I can say, okay, cool. Like they're starting to look really, really similar now. If you look at the two of them together, they flow really nicely and we can move on to the next clip. And whatever method sort of works for you, you can get really granular here with the greens, with the yellows, and make sure that everything is flowing nicely. Okay, so I'm going to turn that off again. Hop back in here. Hello, Laura, Christelle. What's up, gang? How are we all doing here? All right. So we're following along. Color grading to me is so relaxing, at least in my opinion. Anytime I get to this part in the process, I've already completed 75 to 80% of my project. And this is the last final step to really just make everything pop. So I usually throw some music on. I really just enjoy sitting kind of in my own zone and really bringing the piece to life even more. Okay. So we haven't talked about this LUT up here, input LUT, but I am going to actually, if time permits, I'm going to throw an adjustment layer on as the final look, and that's where we're going to add our LUT. So I do things a little bit differently, but if you wanted, you can just add a LUT right to here. But I think color grading, color correction first is important to make sure everything looks good, and then you can add that LUT on at the end. All right, so same thing. Let's go in here. Let's take our saturation to, let's say 130. And you'll notice in doing that, we've now taken the image from a little bit bluer to a warmer tone because that blue has changed. And so what I want to do is I want to still get back to that because I know that the clips before are slightly cooler and I want to make sure they match. So if I drag this over, you'll notice that in my little scope down here at the bottom, I actually drag this and you're seeing that the image is turning a little bluer. I don't want to go too much. So we'll take it there. And then I'm going to start just correcting the blacks. Let's bring the blacks down. Let's bring the shadows down a little bit. Just let's moody this bad boy up. Highlights, let's bring those highlights up. Okay. And I'm not touching the contrast here because that's what I adjust in the curves. And anytime we're taking those highlights and shadows, we're actually adding contrast to that image. So you don't want to overdo it. You don't want it to look crunchy. There is a very subtle nature to it. And what we can see is that we're not really seeing many red magenta color properties. So I'm going to drag this over so I can bring some of that back and then have a more balanced saturated image here. CJ, my go-to music. Oh man, I usually like a little bit of jazz. Honestly, I'm a jazz guy when I'm editing, acoustic, you know, not anything but hard rock pretty much will get me going here. All right, and let's go to curves. Let's go boom, boom, boom. Same kind of thing. Now you're starting to see that same process, and man, it's looking really nice. Let's bring just the midtones up a hair here. Let's bring those highlights. And again, we're not crushing anything. The image is still looking pretty warm and balanced, even though we've pulled the blues. I'm gonna bring the saturation down a little more and the magentas down a touch. Okay, so before and after, huge difference. Let's throw our comparison window up and let's go to split here. And it's looking pretty nice. Now, if I wanted to compare this clip here with these flowers to the clip previously, what I would do is I would drag this here to my next clip. So this is going to be your slider for that. And so now I can actually make these ones match a little better. And quite frankly, they're looking pretty good. I think they're both cool on the cooler tone, cooler side. And if I wanted to warm them up, I could do that kind of globally. So let's just go to one more clip. I know we're running tight on time here, and then we'll show how to add that final LUT to give everything that final look we're going for. Okay, so this is the only clip that we have that's actually shot inside, but again, it's exposed, I think, very properly, so it shouldn't be too hard for us to grade this and make it match. So I'm gonna go in here, I'm gonna take those blacks down, not quite as much. I'm gonna take the highlights up, making sure that I'm still maintaining the highlights that exist outside, even though we're not really looking at that. It's nice not to have those overexposures. Let's bring the whites up. I'm gonna bring the exposure up just a hair, okay? So before and after, excuse me. And I'm gonna actually warm this up a little bit to sort of give a little bit of contrast and difference to what we have previously. Okay, let's bring the shadows up just a little bit. And we're gonna go back to our curves. I'm gonna bring my midtones up on this a little bit more, okay? And then I'm gonna take the blacks down. And so we go from here to here. I wanna bring that saturation up, as we mentioned before. So now we have a really nice saturated image. I'm gonna bring actually these tones back down a little more. So we're having a more balanced blue. So before and after, okay. Let's see where else we want to touch. Maybe these oranges in here, maybe we want to make those pop a little more. So let's go back into that curves section here. And there's that hue luma, and luma is that lumosity, I think, luminosity, and that's the brightness of that color. So let's say I take this eyedropper and I want to come in here to the orange, and I actually want to bring the brightness of that up. Now you'll notice that without me adjusting the shadows or the highlights globally, I'm just adjusting the highlights of anything in here that looks orange, which I think this makes it stand out a little bit more. You can tell that the brick on the wall is getting adjusted, which is kind of cool. And maybe I actually want to bring the saturation of that up a little more as well. So we'll come in here and we'll bring that saturation up, and before and after. So again, nice contrasty image. Looking at our scopes over here, nothing is being clipped, nothing's being blown out. We're really able to use that dynamic range. And again, that's what I mentioned earlier. It is super, super important with color grading to make sure you are using a flat color profile or some sort of color profile that allows you to have the dynamic range and do this to your image in the final post-production process. Okay, so now what I wanna do is I wanna add one last look. Let's say like a creative chef's kiss or a little touch on the top to just give it something a little bit extra. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, I'm going to add a new item, and I'm going to go to adjustment layer. All right. And my adjustment layer is already in my sequence settings. We are going to drag this adjustment layer on here. And again, these are just 4 clips. If we had more time, we would be going through a whole project file, but this is just to get you started on how powerful Lumetri Scopes can be and just really how to use the tools at your disposal for your own projects. And hopefully this does help. All right, so the adjustment layer, we threw it on top. Okay, James, what are we going to do with that? And nothing has happened yet. So what I want to do is I want to come in here and I actually want to add, here we go. Because we're in the color tab already, I can come in here and I can just add a LUT, a lookup table, and that's that creative look that we're talking about. So I personally like to go into the creative tab rather than in here, just, preference, because I can adjust some of these intensities here. So I'm going to go to browse, and I have a couple LUTs specifically for my camera or for a similar Canon camera. There's tons of pre-made LUTs that are a part of your Premiere Pro Creative Cloud subscription already. So even if you don't buy a LUT or you don't create your own, you can find a ton of them in here, and they are actually pretty good. But in my experience with my specific camera, this is what I like to use. So I come in here and let's just go to the first LUT that I have. It's going to look really, really crazy and not good at all. So what I like to do is I come in here and I adjust this intensity. So I'm going to pull the intensity down to, let's just say 30%. Okay. And what we want to do is we want to look at everything we have again and make sure that we still have that consistent look and feel that we're going for, and maybe a bit of a different style. And that LUT is already created with that style in mind. So it has a bit more of like the teal that I'm going for. So if we take this adjustment layer, we toggle it on and off, we can see on these scopes again that we're still not clipping anything. We still have those dark shadows, those dark contrasty images, and it does add a little bit of saturation to the image. So let's go to the next clip. Okay, this one is looking maybe a little too saturated in my opinion. So let's go here, before and after. But again, we're still not clipping anything. The highlights are looking good. I think what I'll probably do is I'll go into the actual clip here and I'll bring the saturation down to, let's say 130. So before and after, and I might take the highlights down just a hair. Okay. And I'm going to throw this comparison view up so we can see what we are working on. This dog, by the way, was so cool. Like my wife and I were hiking in Bend and we randomly ran into the ex-mayor of Bend on the hike. We were there for a project and she had this really cool dog and a super cool cabin. So we got a chance to film the dog, which was pretty cool. All right. And I think this clip right now is looking a little hot for me as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the highlights down just a little bit. And actually, this is interesting. I've never seen these scopes up with the comparison view. You'll notice what this does is it actually splits the 2 clips. So the left side here is our dog and the right side is our flower. So that allows you to really get super, super close and make sure that, the shadows are all sort of lined up as best you can. Okay, let's go to the inside. This right now is looking maybe like it needs the shadows to come up a little bit and maybe the exposure a little bit more, just so that we match the inside look and feel before and after. And you can see like we're losing a little bit of detail right here outside. That's this top like 100 highlights that's happening. So I'm gonna actually work on pulling that down in my whites. And I am constantly flicking the effects on and off to see the progress I've made, to see what I have, to see what it's looking like. And right now, if I scroll through just these 4 clips, that we achieved pretty quickly here, we have really nice contrast, really nice color. So before and after, love that. It's looking really good. And again, this is just my style. Somebody might be watching this and grade this in a totally different way, and that is absolutely okay. You might say, wow, James, what are you doing? This looks like trash. But I personally think it looks good. So hopefully you do as well. And hopefully you got a little bit out of color grading in Premiere Pro. The Lumetri Scopes, again, are really, really powerful. As I mentioned before, this settings control here is where you can see the different scopes. Right here is the comparison view, which is helpful. in making sure that each clip is consistent with the other clip, because there's nothing worse than watching back a film or a video and the one or two clips that is either not color graded or stands out, and people do notice those kind of things. So yeah, so that's sort of all that I have for you today. Hopefully you learned something. Premiere Pro, color grading, just editing and video editing in general is, of course, something I'm very passionate about. And I'm glad that I could share with you my tips and tricks in Premiere Pro and the Lumetri Color tab today. So that being said, hopefully the source files worked out for you. Please stay tuned and stick around tomorrow at the same time, 5:00 p.m. Eastern time, where we're hopping into Premiere Pro once again. And I will be very excited to teach you my ways and show you some more shortcuts. So thank you, everyone. And we'll see you in the next one. Take care.